Well, I'm Michael Manfredi. I'm a partner with Weiss Manfredi Architects.
And I'm Marion Weiss, partner with Weiss Manfredi Architects.
And we're here to talk about the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And we're especially delighted to talk about the Botanic Garden for a number of reasons. Both Marion and I teach, and we love the idea that the Botanic Garden is a place of learning, and any kind of architectural project ought to be a place where a visitor can discover the enchanting and intellectual promise of the Botanic Garden.
What's extraordinary about the Brooklyn Botanic Garden is it's a place that is effectively a curated collection that you can wander through almost theatrically and cinematically, so that every garden, every destination has its own identity. So the Visitor Center for us was an opportunity to submit largely to the experience of being part of a garden, but invite you to get to know through the exhibitions more about the Botanic Garden, and also leverage the very interesting thing of the arrival expressing an invitation from the city, and then where you are left in the garden being just a whisper of a building and being almost 100% a garden. So 440 linear feet take you from a piece of architecture to something that's exclusively a landscape. And that wandering really is that inhabitable topography, an Olmstedian kind of translation into a section of a building.
And actually, to build on the way Marion described the building, I think it was very important for us to not think of the building as an isolated object, but to think of it as part of a linear experience, so that you never sort of see the building in isolation. You always see it in relation to the garden. And you never see the building in its totality. The building, in a way, seduces you to move through the building, into the building, over the building, in fact, and into the garden. So, in a sense, the building allows you, our hope is, at least, that the building allows you to understand the topography of the garden, understand certain views into the garden, and in a way be part of the indelible experience of being in a garden rather than just being in a building.
For us, when we visited the garden, it was the element of surprise of coming through one small opening and all of a sudden feeling as if we were the first and only ones to have ever discovered this sort of extraordinary backyard. And originally the Brooklyn Botanic Garden thought that there should be, right at the end of that main cherry esplanade, a visitor center, right on axis, to get you right into the heart of the garden. And we questioned that plan and said it might be more interesting to arrive at the edge of the city and only through that wandering 440 linear feet discover the heart of the garden. And in the course of the interview, we said, at the risk of losing the job, this is what we really think would be a more authentic way to experience as a visitor the arrival to the garden. And they were really engaged by that idea and changed the original ambition and moved the point of the visitor center and the location to where it is today. I think the other element is that there is this green roof with 44,000 plants, and it really is a 10,000 square foot curated garden, which is not just a green roof, because we know many green roofs, but it's actually on top of the only two-sided room that we know of in the world that can host 160 for a wedding. And that's that event space, which is really this lozenge-shaped room that is that one moment of that path that really is fully inhabited to be able to host events. And it is the sort of underside of this green roof.
It's probably worth talking a little bit, now that Marion's kind of mentioned the green roof, which is the fourth facade of the building, to kind of talk about the geometry of the building, because the building, in a way, is serpentine. It sort of curves like an S in its entirety, and it actually, the curves of the building are very carefully studied so that they avoid the drip line of very, very beautiful trees, such as the only green flowering cherry tree in North America. They also curve so that you can adjust the existing path structures to enter the cherry blossom zone, the cherry blossom garden, in an oblique way rather than purely a frontal way. So again, there's a sort of sense of seduction. The building leads you gently through and into parts of the garden that are especially beautiful, rather than being an end unto itself. as such, there are certain environmental agendas that were extremely important for the Botanic Garden, but also for the ethos of this building and in our own work. Marion mentioned the green roof, which is an experimental green roof. There are also areas where, as you enter, there are a series of rain gardens. If you enter, you'll notice that there are areas where you can collect water, and that water is actually cleansed naturally and then slowly discharged into the Japanese pond. The water at that point is clean, and the idea is to keep the water contained within the grounds, within the precinct of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. There's a host of different kinds of vegetation types that we've introduced that were very much indigenous to this particular area, so it's also a chance to recall the really incredible landscapes that were part of Brooklyn pre-colonial times. So there's an agenda there to educate in terms of the plant materials. And then finally, the architecture itself carries with it a number of elements that are sustainable in the sense that, for example, the wood that lines what Marion talked about as the only two-sided room, if you picture the sort of shape of a leaf, that's been lined with ginkgo paneling that was kiln-dried from ginkgo trees that were on site that were too old or diseased. And rather than just mulch those trees up, which is often the case, we had them kiln-dried and turned into very beautiful paneling so that the memory of the tree is still a part of the architecture. And we thought not only is that an important sustainable and ecological objective, but it also builds up a sort of sense of the history of a place, which is very important.
Finally, one of the things that was important for us was to really make it very ambiguous as to where the building begins and where the architecture ends. And in many ways, it really is a kind of a landform that's inhabited and ventilated, because if you are at the upper terrace, the ginkgo alley that overlooks the whole garden, that level actually is tiered down a few steps with a series of terraces that you can sit on before the last terrace, if you will, really is part of the building. So all of these kind of topographic and sectional agendas that the building takes on are also carried out and extended out into the broader landscape. Our hope was that it's a large building, but as Michael mentioned, you can never see all of it all at once, ever. So that just the glass pavilion area that you arrive at where the gift store is and a meeting area is a edge of a passage that takes you to the edge of the Japanese garden or into the exhibition area. I guess this idea of really amplifying the nature of the visitor center as opposed to the architecture is really part of that intent.
Actually, the building has, as we've kind of talked about, has a sort of ecological and a natural agenda. It has an affinity to landscape. So in a certain sense, the building melts into the landscape, or alternately, the landscape asserts itself. But there's also a social agenda, and part of that is driven by what's fantastic about the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. It's actually one of the most urban and unique botanic gardens. It's only 56 acres, which is relatively small, and it's in the middle of a very, very dense urban area. And the Botanic Garden was actually one of the first pioneers in terms of educating the public about the importance of eating and urban gardening, the importance of teaching children. So they were the first children's garden. They were the first Japanese garden in North America. So it was there's a really strong pedagogical history to the garden. And in a way, we wanted the building not to be an end unto itself, but to sort of open up the wonders that are the Botanic Garden. And those wonders are educational and social, as well as they are scientific and artistic.